Teacher of gods and human beings, do you the completing and fully awake one? Do you doubt yourself, describe the glorious one, the subdual from the Shakya clan? I prostrate before you, the true refuge, to the Dharma living Dharma receiving destroyer, the one gone beyond, the third destroyer, the completing perfect, the fully awakened being, perfectly balanced, the Siddhartha, the moral world, supreme guardian, protector, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, do you doubt yourself, the glorious one, the subdual from the Shakya clan? I prostrate before you, the true refuge, to the far living endowed receiving destroyer, the one gone beyond, the third destroyer, the completely perfect, the fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and full conduct, Sagatha, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, do you doubt yourself, destroyer, the glorious conqueror who subdued from the Shakya clan? I prostrate before you, the true refuge, you rest in the most unique and formless earth. You paced out 7 strides in the 7 days. To you, the wise then, I prostrate. The glorious one,
O
the
supremely
true,
pure,
resurrection,
like a golden mountain,
the fame that blazes in the
3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. The supreme science, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate.
just
Thus
free
free
like
like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate.
the
The
Savior
Saviour,
having
having
great
great compassion, the Founder, having whole understanding, the field of merit, with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the moral path, the sublime reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate.
those who are liberated and
And
also
also
show
showed the
the path
path
to
to
liberation,
liberation,
the
the
holy
holy
field
field
qualified
qualified
with
with
realizations,
realizations.
who are devoted to the moral precepts. To
To
you,
you,
the
the
sublime
sublime
community
community intending
intending
virtue,
virtue,
I
I prostrate.
prostrate.
Homage
Homage
to
to
the
the
Supreme
Supreme
Buddha,
Buddha,
homage
homage
to
to
the
the
Dharma
Dharma
refuge,
refuge,
homage
homage
to
to
the
the
great
great
Sangha,
Sangha,
to
to
all
all
three,
three,
every
every devout
devout
homage,
homage,
to all worthy of respect, bowing bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects. Supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha.
a
A
star,
star,
a visual aberration, the flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through
through
these
these
merits
merits
may
may
sentient
sentient
beings
beings
attain
attain
the
the
rank
rank
of
of
all
all
seeing,
seeing,
subdue the
foul
foul faults,
faults,
and
and
be
be
delivered
delivered
from
from
samsara's
samsara's
ocean,
ocean.
perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. To page 15, the Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Aryas of the ten. Thus unite here at one time. I prolong the flowing and thus the pulses mounting and rising together with great at that time, the vagabonds absorbed in contemplation of the happiness of the Lord of all without perfection. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva monks after Arya Avalokiteshvara, thought upon the very practice of profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those high benefits also seem to be inherent nature. Then, empowering the Buddha, the venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva monks after Arya Avalokiteshvara: I am a beast of the mixed trade, who wishes to practice perfection in without perfection of wisdom. He said that when the Bodhisattva monks after Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the venerable Sharitaka Putra, Shariputra gazed at them in full humility, who wishes to practice dedicated and profound perfection of wisdom. Shariputra answered, dedicated virtue can be known in those high benefits also seem to be inherent nature. Thoughts thoughts also not perfect. In the same way, feelings, recollection, composition, or practice of feelings besides wisdom. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are universe, without characteristic, constitute, conceits, and without state, There is
no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and harm. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, Mandalini, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice a profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoiced. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shardhaviputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and devas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Page 25 for the short mandala. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami.
Sanje Chedan Saji Chanam Chanjo Bada Dani Jasa Taki Chujin Jive Sanam Ki Dora Benji Sanje Dura Sanje Chedan Saji Chanam Chanjo Bada Dani Taki Chujin Jive Sanam Dora Benji Sanje Dura Sanje
Chedan Saji Chanam
Chanjo Bada Dani Dage Jujin Jive Sanam Ki Dola Benji Sanje Drupara Sanam Gushi Nishi Nishi Dinze Kanyin Dang Dola Pimba Chinam Lashi Anda Yanda De Medina Nama Kune Nasa Desa Kanyin De Shuje Sambe Soje Sanje Jini Yam De La Cha Se Kanga De Se Nye Se Dawa De Je Bawa Yin De Me Shine De Se Ve Kodan De La Cha Se To Nye Nye Je Se De Kan Chana Pima De De Je Se La So De Se Shine De La Doshi Pandeza Lama Ramboja, Dagi Ningra Band Nation, Condition Mechanism, and the Ecosanto Jung to the door. So I had that because the only Nina Yakuina, Takoina.
Okay, so checking for the people online. Are you hearing? Is it clear?
And it
So Monday was clear. Apparently.
Monday, Samala Yagudu the Neda, although da around Chedan, do you chew? You love John Che, that's all the children Simji Duerwa.
Yeah.
A letter Simji do as needed, let her around your maridile. Not to units in the door, the Tatanda. Then a lockdown of China young around beja che zinda da jingye che go 직 편도 쉬우도 하대로.
Yeah.
무슨 편도 쉬우도 하대로.
Okay, so Buddha Dharma, the purpose is to study it, and the sole reason is to subdue your mind, to subdue your mental continuum. This is not easy, is it? To train the mind, but somehow we can come to class in lockdown, and we can look at the text. That's very good. That's a good opportunity.
가실 되게 비지체 내가 체네. 로전 체 말한 얘기들이야. 록다운데 다들 야구 청라게 jir다.
Yeah. So some that are normally busy and don't have a chance to study because they're busy, because of lockdown, they have a chance now, no? To be still.
경에 도샤. 경에 도샤서. 경에 도샤.
Yeah, this is taking adverse circumstances into the past, making them positive.
경에 중나 상상을 야고도 최대 누가 차차. 경에의 상상을. 경에의 유나 주냐 냠네 치아. 요가다 야가 요설티.
Right, so it is sometimes the case that when one faces adverse circumstances, the Dharma practice gets better. And for some, the poorer the conditions, the better the practice.
당서 굴론지 검겨라. 네 굴론지 나 단다디 대고 준비치 다 전주선배 람게 연된 시가 요러 람게 연된 시 연된 상가라 다디 증인지 총화데 간여하게 최디 대고 준비치래 이나야 수수 굴론디 저 키마도나나야 최디 대고 준비 최인배 핑이요 말아 간산 대고 준비 최디 수고시고 요래라고 간산 대고 준비 최디 주면서 수수 삼노단단을 내고 땅에 춘이야 돼 아니 심지신의 편법바식도에 최디 니마 드리네생에 계속 전주선배 예 랑귀 윤된도 야고직 장제는 수수길을 개토가 시기니 뒤껴와대 시행의 편법도에 시디 이 뒤에치 등에 진짜 인기여 선배 굴론 야고직 네 제쇼스라.
So that coming back class should be that of the vast vehicle, the great vehicle, of course, bodhicitta, and coming to know what that means, this mind of bodhicitta, the qualities of the awakening heart, the awakening mind. Of course, we could say that the Dharma we're listening to is the vast vehicle, the great vehicle, but if we are not motivated in that way, it doesn't become the great vehicle practice of altruism. So what's being said is the person's attitude must be vast for it to be a great vehicle motivation. And in that sense, that attitude would be just for the benefit of sentient beings. From this time on, I will study about bodhicitta. To that end, I'm going to listen to this class about how to benefit others.
어다 가와 검티링 대고 준비 취지 암전 인기 중앙에 메제들이야 배 겨우 성부 충성 레르바다 겨우 성부로 삼단신 가와 검스.
Now rejoice, thinking today one has the fortune to listen to the great vehicle teaching.
뭐야 다 기승 지난주 단다 익제기 지회 틀린 것이 세부소고야 직니시도 어디 내가 전부 직니시도 어디 마직 세시 지나서로.
There were a couple of questions that were sat in the exam we had last month or before that need to be clarified. We thought we'd go through that.
아담왕조디 토릭스네만에 세지다네 토릭숨 세지와티 직시에나와.
The first one we thought we'd go through is question 2, which is around abiding in the class of realizations of the three vehicles. So if you have the questions in front of you, you can refer. I'll read out the question. What does it mean to abide in the class of realizations of, for example, the respective vehicles? We could say Mahayana vehicle, Hinayana vehicle, solitary realizer, Hera, so forth.
그래서 또 그릭 시기도와 나 페베기 시기도나 친루니도와 또 릭스와 도스네. 똑바디 냠도 똑바람 네 방랑저 건산디 줄라야 잔주그 셈다 니 람다 동이도베 로다 수수 셈다 들어봐다 다도 많자 베나 수수 셈디 잔주 셈지 ngol 주바들라 니 똑바세로 냠 람지 또 다도 똑바 줄라 제샤세도 똑바 줄라 제스죠 잔주 셈도 똑바 줄라 제샤 아니 수수 셈디게 미다고 또 요인데 네 줄 미다고도 똑바 제샤 수수 셈디 동반이 또 요인데 디줄 동반이 또베 똑바 제샤세도 똑바 사데 똑사데 냠도 똑바데 레스로.
Let's look at the question in terms of the words there. Firstly, this word realizations, tok, nam tok in Tibetan. So here we're talking about realizing something in terms of a path, a validity. So one could realize bodhicitta, for example. One could realize realize emptiness. So really we're talking about the mind realizing that. So in fact, in terms of bodhicitta, the mind becomes that bodhicitta. Or one can have a mind that realizes impermanence, a mind that realizes emptiness. So this word to realize.
다 릭세드 찍발하고 찍바 릭 찍바 가서 미릭 찍바 세도 미 찍바 말아서 미인바디 미릭 찍바레스바 아니 먼저 잘라러 버지네 탭이나 탭데 릭 찍바레스로 그 대전 찍바 릭 찍바 세야 돼봐 아니 세상 찬주의 셈 유일의 기와들 찬주스는 똑바체 다 찬주의 셈 유연이 창마 안에 똑바 릭 찍바레스 도릭 찍세야 돼봐 들어와다.
Now, the second part of the question really, which is talking about the class, to abide in the class. That word class then is talking about a same category. So we're all in the class of humans, for example. So we are in that category. Or you could have the class of book, everything that's in that category or class of book. So therefore the example is if someone realizes bodhicitta, they've realized that, and anyone who realizes bodhicitta is in that class, abides in that class of having realized.
다 제네마다 단대디 고든 식디 고든시 다 다데마 치게 된데 단다디 또마 띵사로서 도베이나 아니 미바다 넘버 찾아왔어요. 아니 미바다 넘버 찾아와 임바마세 아니 디 곰제 조인 봐. 어디라 안에 도릭스 다 도릭스가 트렌디 갑디 도릭 트렌디 미그바단데 페나조 동니로 오질래 자로 동니도베 도버디다 동니디 미그바르바 그 미그바 아니 로코랑 동니도베 도베 오월이야 제인자 남바르바 미그바단 남바체 다 대단 차다와 아니 곰제 조체네다 다 동니 곰제 조 체뉴인데 텐데기 곰니 로디게 치상마 아니 동니도베 도바데나 릭지바체 도릭지바 그다 민남 차다와 아니 디진 로바나니 곰제 조체와 총바서 찍버와 찍버이 메테와 제산베나 동니래잖아 세우다 미그바디 동니체 남바디 동니도 로크란 동니도가 진단 유친 야 남바샤데기 요로 대다 차다왔으네 답변은 안저다워지기 안저 동니도요 말데랑 안저 동니 곰바이나 안저 동니 곰베 로디 아니 티진기 도르스도고요 가르스나 전주선배주지 돈이도와 대단 남바 차다와 네 티진 로바담니 곰제 조체와디 찍바 임바 인자 안저 셈디게 냠렌디 티진게 돈이도와 도과 대단 릭직바다 도리직바 하디세우 자로도.
Right, so now we can go deeper into understanding abiding in the class of realizations of the particular vehicle when we look at the sameness of focal object and aspect. We also have to remember mainly, that focuses mainly on what it's focusing on. So for example, let's take the object or focal object of emptiness, that's your focal object in this case, and the aspect is going to be the mind that is perceiving it. How, what appears, the vacuity. So mainly focusing on emptiness with the mind that has the aspect of perceiving that utter vacuity, then that's the same class of focal object and aspect. So in that case, you would say anyone that is taking that as your main object of focus and aspect abides in that class. So for example, let's give the example of the Bodhisattva trainee who is of the great vehicle class, but their mind is striving to realize emptiness. So then their focal object is emptiness, and the appearance, once again, the aspect is the utter vacuity. So anyone who does that is of the same class of the Mahayana vehicle.
다 티진 도릭세야 베나 다 티진이 도릭라연데 티진 로바담이 곰제 조체 찍고 차고라 베나 돈이 다 나나가서 엄마랑 유루시게 요라 아니 돈이디 네 티진 로바는 곰제 조체로 곰제 조르와 네 대단 당한서 민난 차다와디 다 돈이도 벨로단 리서 티진이 도릭스네와스라고 요르다와
So now let's look at this once more, this example then of the great vehicle trainee, he or she, from the perspective of the Middle Way Autonomous School, is going for emptiness as their focal object and going for that direct insight into it. So anyone who who goes for that and abides in it is abiding in the class of Mahayana vehicle.
다디나 이 chanju sem gomba inarwa chanju sem gomende 아니 다 chanju sem 대야 mikpa 남바도 때 세고 갖고 돼서 요래로 chanju sem 지 mikpa 대 적장으로 산제지 고마로 남바데 톰데 진단 유지 친인데 chanju sem라다 쭉 적장 또 그래 말다 두선 집제치야 요로 단다다 chanju sem 야 어두zo 아니 닝지 첨보잖아 다 닝지 첨보디 mikpa semje tamje mikora 아니 남바데 semje 동에데 텐도가 남바들와 어디 닝지 첨보디 니다다 곰니 베나가서 닝지 첨보 곰바이나 라마슐라다 닝지 귤마지니가 닝지 첨보 곰바이나 dimbe 곰벨로데 티진이 도르스네요 가서나 거기 mik바다 남바 차다와 티진 로바난지 곰제 조체와도 총모라 왔다고 제가 어디 대대도 세우차 찍 세우차
So to clarify this again with another example, let's say you're meditating on bodhicitta your focal object is, in fact, all sentient beings with the idea to place them in Buddhahood. But the aspect is to place them in bliss and free them from suffering. Well, let's make it a bit easier and use the example of great compassion. So here, if you're meditating on great compassion, your focal object is all sentient beings, and your aspect is to free them from suffering and its causes. Now, if that is your kind of main purpose or focus and aspect, then you are abiding in the class of the great vehicle. Why? Because you have the same focal object and aspect of one who abides in such a class.
다디나시 베나 년도지 다 년도지 태버와 년도지 태고에 도르스네 간산담이 너와 간산담이 검제 조시 베나 그 년도지 도르스네 그래 미과 간산담이체 남바디 간산담이도 남바체 아니 데틱지 틱다 년도로 남지 검제 조 디와 간산담이 검제 조로 제산디 니 검니가 남디게 상마 아니 년도지 도르스네 그러고요다
Now, to abide in the class of realizations of the hearer. Okay, so then you have to abide in a similar focal object and aspect. What would those be? For this hearer, it is the non-self of persons, isn't it? That's the focal object. And nambadi?
Number concept number.
Oh yeah, sorry, the aspect will be the lack of the appearance of the self of persons. So if that is your main purpose or goal, and you abide therein, then that's abiding in the class of hearer realization.
다디나시 랑제 도르네서 디 니동디 미바 니동체 남바 니동도베 남바체 디 곰니들라 니 랑제 도르스네로 랑제 로바나 니 곰제 조디 니동로바.
And then going on to the solitary realizer, what is their focal object and aspect? They are focusing on the lack of duality of subject and object, and what appears to them is that lack of it. So non-dual, their focal object is not fixating on duality, subject-object.
그래서 랑제 로바나 곰제 조디 니동체 반제 조디 니 치료진들 준비했지바디체 아니 톱제 조디 랑제 따주면 고마워.
Yeah, so for those solitary realizers, the focal object is, that the appearance of, kind of a distinction between subject and object, and what's to be abandoned is that appearance, and then the result will be their particular arhathood of solitary realizer, the fruit.
년도지 검제조디 그래 간산담이 검제조체 반제조 간산단지체 톱제조디 년도 다주면고 마시로.
And respectively, the focal object of the hearer that we already mentioned is the self of persons, and what they're abandoning is clinging to that self of persons, and the resultant is the arhathood of that particular vehicle, which is the hearer's vehicle, arhathood.
다든데 티진라 검제조디 동반이체 반제조디 시두샤나지 그래 간산데 초기단지샤나리로 템버드바즈미 딘지 단다란 줄로라 아니 톱자디 아니 산지지 고마로.
Now, when we look at the great vehicle practitioner, what are they meditating on? Their focal object is emptiness. What are they abandoning? Subtle obscurations to omniscience, or you could say grasping at true existence of phenomena. And finally, what's the goal? Buddhahood, that's the fruit. So those three for the great vehicle practitioner.
다디네 단다 탑신이 있으면 진짜 되지 세워서도 말해. Did you What's your
question?
I'm just asking because that was question number 4 as well.
Yes, that's right.
The focal objects and stuff.
Yep.
For all three categories, the solitary realizer and body the vehicle. There's two choices. There's the focal object when the person is in meditative equipoise upon the emptiness So are we assuming that the person is in meditative equipoise upon the actual emptiness, in which case, of course, the aspect is non-duality and the aspect is the vacuity, etc.
Yeah.
Or if it's the focal object is, as you've said, just in this last example, it's self of persons and appearances and apprehended not being different, then surely the focal object would be, the illustration of a person, the illustration of an appearance and an apprehender. You see what I mean? As opposed to resultant, equipoise of the actual emptiness. You see what I'm trying to say? There's two choices. The focal object could either be the self of persons or the self less of persons, which is more of a realization, or it could be the focal object could be the appearance and the apprehender, or it could be the non-duality of that. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Depending whether you're in equipoise or.
Yeah, Namsha Mayamba la kepa dues di kola. Pena mik paratang pangbatang drebu. Pena Namsha ye bikapla denzo chikpuribes. Namsha Mayamba. Pena kasigare rangsangi ninangi ya nitangi nyawa nyok ruwadi. Di kapla konzo mikpa di ninang mayamba di lo di ruwadi. Pangba dang mikpa la kepa ka du di nyamsha ye kapla denzo tiwa shipa di dreberbe. Tiwa shipa di kasigare mikyul dang pangba dang drebo sum ruwadi. Tekpa sum nangla. Di tiwa di namsha ye kapla tiwa rebes namsha. Are paping namsha ye du. Di nangshin tiwa nang rebes. Pena nyentu gi namsha ye kapla. Kurangi mikyu di kanzak dame rawadi. Kanzak. Yeah, so for the hearer. Repeat the question.
English, repeat.
Oh, do you want the question repeated? Yeah, so the question was, for these focal objects of meditation, abandonment, and attainment for each of the three vehicles, are we talking about whether it is at the time of meditative equipoise, specifically on the objects, or in general? Is that the question?
Well, I mean, you can sort of the general part's a little bit general, but anyway, we'll see what the answer is and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I wasn't so clear with the question actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
It might
be better to take the example of one of those three to clarify it. So let's take the first one. Okay. Right, so the first one, the hearer's main object of meditation is the self of persons.
The self of persons.
Yeah, non-self of persons. That's what I said before. Yeah, the non-self of persons.
Okay, so that's the question. So
what they're abandoning is clinging to the self of persons.
Yeah, but the question is, if they are abandoning
clinging to a self of persons,
and the idea is the focus is non-self or person, okay, surely the object that they're focusing on also would be an illustration of person, because without the illustration of a person, how can they get to non-self or person?
So the question is, yeah, kanzaki yeah, dikabla simba an example of the person. So like illustration. Pena suncha. Di mikyo yena suncha gorwas. Pena kanza gidame gombe kabla. Kanza la tene kanza gidame togorwa.
Chidera.
Alright. Morang la kanza ki dikabla kanza ki mikyo di kanza ki
kanza mare kanza damir. Kanza mare. 간사 담에 검자다 민남바 체대도 간사라 민네 아니 공고르면 간사 미유디 송구 말와다 미유조데 간사 담에로다
Yeah, their main focal object is the lack of the self of persons, not the illustration of the person. Independence on the illustration of the person, they meditate on the non-self of it.
대용 지금 말에 빼나 돈이라 자다로
Let's take emptiness.
돈이자 간사딩게 돈 빼나들어 간사 말아버지 빼나 품베 포베딩게 동반이 고므라 포베 동반이 고면데 아니 텐데기 냠샤야 된 거라 포바여 말아 동반님이시 포베딩게 동반님이시 지금 포바여 말아 포바를 미기 말아 포바 미유디서 다 미유디 숭세다 그 미유디 숭을 될래 그 미유 인세게 말이다 냠 디티젠털로 바제면한 게 미유들라 뭐그 미유들라 단다 전 동님이시 시작 말아
So when, for example, one is meditating on the emptiness of cup, the cup is not appearing to the meditator's cognition, just the vacuity of it. So in that case, there's no appearance of the cup. The mind is holding emptiness as its main meditation focus. We're talking here about the main object of meditation in equipoise.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, that's why that word primary is used. Miguel saw.
Can I continue? Yep, I understand that. So following that line of reasoning then, the next one, the solitary realizer.
Rang Sangye, yeah, the solitary realizer.
So same idea, he is meditating on the object possessor and the object basically and the subject as being non-duality.
Yeah, lacking different substantial entityness.
That's right.
Yep.
So independence on, would it be an independence, like with independence on the cup and like the prison? Would this be independence on the mental consciousness as an illustrator of apprehender that the non-duality is established?
Okay, so the question was, in the next vehicle, the solitary realizer vehicle, what they're focusing on is the lack of duality of subject and object.
Yeah.
And just as we used a cup to illustrate the vacuity which is realized in dependence upon the object of the cup or the person.
Yeah, mental consciousness is...
So then the question comes, is the mental consciousness used as a reference point?
That's right.
Yeah. So, kisla rang sangye ki mikyudi nitong rwa the yudan yuching nitong ti morang la te number shape ki tendu nitong gilo ti rachu ro number shape che kalsan yudan yushen nang la yuchen se ti chik jago gudwa
reje tire tejar tanda des de nitong se de sugdan sunji sema zeta de don ni pobadan pobajimbe sema zeta de don 아니 탭단 대진배 참마 제타 되고 인지민지 유진 참마데 되는 제타 되고 샤고라 한다 제직 샤고로 한다 디조이는 먼저 로데버도 조이는 제타 되 군이 준대 gelin 치고로
알레
심장바 준대 말에 튜념레 군이 제직 레스고로 어디라고 인지민지 샤와데 되고 거데 샤와데
Yeah, that's right. In this sense of this realization, there has to be a mental consciousness that is part of it, because those that aren't mind only, that are lower schools, looking at the cause and effect of gross form, they would see the lack of substantial entity between the mind and the object.
나디 현동 서지 현동 단디 윤데 동반인의 현동 셔도 제타데 제직 동으로 제신 동으로 현동 저런 단다 동반인의 현동 샤니도 망부지기 되셈자면 다와디 셰 리고요.
So then we start to talk about Shentong, which is the school of thought that believes in emptiness of other, which is like mind only, which is like saying that there's this emptiness of other.
나 심다 셰바다 유디 제타데 동아데 냠샤 딩올라 동아 딩올라다 고 셰바 용싱 말바군이 다디 독과 배진 딘데 연구했어요 몰라
Again, younger?
냠 다디 제타데 그 동아 미기르바 미운디 딩올라 아니 참마디 단 참마 제타데 동아디 여러메지지 딩올라 참마다한테 셔와케 요마르바 냠샤 딩올 로 딩올
Yeah.
로 곰니저라 니동 곰니저라
Yeah.
니동데 딱과라 딱과 제가
Yeah, what's probably raising the doubt is that when such a person is meditating in equipoise on the lack of substantial different entity between subject and object, there isn't an appearance of that substantial object because that lack of appearance or that vacuity is a permanent state. Yep.
Right, so the mental consciousness is the thing that's placed upon, dependent upon.
Yeah, maar die number shape die le tene togorwa. Number shape.
number shape 다 유니 제타데 동 레데네 또바레딜레 number shape 코나 도구마레 딜로딩고 곰니디 또 니동 곰니 글로디게 아니 쉐봉고 스토나 아니 디마르바다.
Yeah, it is not that's correct. There is a part that the mental consciousness plays. Hold on, Britta. There is a part that the mental consciousness plays, but it is the lack of duality of subject and object that is realized by that mind, not just the mind itself. Yeah, so the question was, is it in dependence on the mental consciousness that the lack of substantial difference between subject and object is realized? And Geshe-la replied, well, not just the mental consciousness, because what's being realized is the lack of difference between subject and object.
Okay, so then let's go to the next one, which was the next question. So the body itself the vehicle, so the object that we're in dependence upon would be...
so you're talking about the focal object here?
Yeah, well...
Mainly.
Yeah, emptiness, lack of intrinsic...
Yeah, emptiness, yep.
We have to have a basis for that. So that would be the 5 aggregates as an illustration of person.
So the question is, we go to the next example of focal object for the great vehicle practitioner, the Bodhisattva. Their focal object is emptiness, and would an example of that upon which they realize it be the 5 aggregates? Geshe-la, as an illustration of person. The konza de tekchemba gi mikpa the tongni de cherwa so the pomanga la tene de la mikara base.
The Pumbunga, so Pumbuda, Inji, Pumbunga la dene, the Pumbunga la dene, Pumungating Dumbanil Shan, de Ross, and the Shiraning Munganalaya, Pumbunga with the Daranshi, Tongbata Sundwa.
Yeah.
No, dear, Pumbunga Korana, Pumbunga de Mi, that would Dodo Jesse Shiro the Che, Titing Tombanila Mi or Desrida. Miss Pumbunga Koran Comjezo Chigio Marada.
Well, here it would be a little bit inaccurate to say that they're just meditating on the 5 aggregates. They are meditating on the lack of intrinsic existence of the 5 aggregates, would be more correct.
Yes, that's true.
Because it says in the Heart Sutra, examining the 5 aggregates by nature empty, that would be a correct way to put your answer.
Da, Shinda, to us.
Geshe-la de tabdang sherab ki kapa.
Leo, Tapshi Simas in the row. Tadi didn't catch him more. Tadi de Langela, de Nando Shingwa, the big catch him more, that Tapdan Sheriff. Tambo Taps in the Kalagore, Sheriffs in the Karsawara. Did you Shinaya?
Now, there was this question that was also a bit difficult about method and wisdom. And this is quite a big question. Sorry, I've forgotten the number. Oh, number 3. This is important. No. Question 3.
Pena Taps in the Kalagore, torching it, sort of torching it. Taps in a Pena torching the shower. Tanda Umajuan Tanya Demba Taps Juva, Tandan Demba Tabjun Juva in Isuda. Dini Ganamikan and Mishiva didn't number of language. Says a Kunzo Demba de la Tab dance. Taguming Java. The Kunzo de Kunzo Demba de Tanya Demba said Kunzo Demba de Tapche. 갑디기 가서 탑다 셔럽어야 돼. 딜러 코너 되게 탑어야 돼. 제가 네 나네다 쪼디 아니 베나 찬주기 셈다 닝제도다 탑 쪼들어 봐다 탑 나라야 탑 쪼다 탑 해버린 거라 먼저 직진바다야 주름성야 도서 탑다 용라게 탑으로 버치 디나네다 닝제당 찬주기 셈데 탑 쳐버진 차고도 와다 탑시 쳐와 탑 쳐버진 거 차고 가서는 그 델라데네 산제 탑도 여러 되면은 산제 탑도 요 말아 탑 써야 돼 군조 비유의 진행이 애네 람지림바디 제라 탑스 코나 디기어다 단다로지
To understand firstly method tangpo troro, I guess tros and tros.
톡지어스나 록바치와
Ale. So one way to understand the first aspect of this question, the method under the twofold method and wisdom in terms of the paramita vehicle, would be to understand it. The method is like a support that which assists. In that sense, relative truth or truth for an obscured mind. Here, we're mainly really talking about, in this context, the great compassion and bodhicitta. Of course, these other these other perfections, generosity, ethics, patience, and so forth, are common conventionalities or relative truths. But really, Shin Khyapa, we're talking about specific relative truths that act as a cause for Buddhahood. And these two are great compassion and bodhicitta. So you can understand the method as being those two, really, in this context.
제가 베나가서 두스자비나 실라 덴바니 여러와 덴바니나네 군조 덴바데 아니 유디체 탑그 잘자 다 딜라데네 아니 지 개와다 람칭이도 찬주sem다 짐바다야 출연소야 소고미야 닝지고미야 라소바데다 아니 탑레다 탑그 차견야러와 다 딜라데네 중에 개와들라 아니 소남지 초서 초러와 소남지 초 예 람지네가서 초 소남지 초시 디네 데비네가서 가르서는 산제지 수구구도 그래서 수구도서 봐 먼저 체현상부 숨지산이 배제상부 제주다도 수구도서 정말 아니 탑지 조 데비차고 여러 또 실람나 아니 실람 데비다다 로다로
Now, one can understand this further if we look at basis, path, and fruit, or basis, path, and result. In terms of the basis of the two truths, we have the object, which is the relative truth first, or the method. And as was mentioned, these 6 perfections that are performed, generosity and so forth, are all on the method side, up to and including the concentrations. And all of those, when those roots of virtues of those paramitas being methods are collected together, they make up what's called the merit collection. And the collection of merit results in the body of a Buddha, the form body of a Buddha. We know that the form body of a Buddha has 32 major and 80 minor marks. So that's the Tabki Chokre.
탑지
Yeah, that's the result of the first of the two of method and wisdom.
다드네 셔럽라데 갈라서나 아니 셔럽그 지단 셔럽 거든데 저르드 남제지 로르바 디임바다 디마임바 나바셰바데르바
Okay.
갑디게 네 탑단 셔럽니기 셔럽데 다메도 왜 셔럽라 중고변에로 타도시니들 샤고라다
Yes. So now when we get to talk about the wisdom side, it is a type of discriminating awareness or intelligence that is going, it is this, it is not that. But really, what wisdom is referring to here is the type of mind that gets to the final mode of abidance of its object, its reality.
다들라 시람 데우스코인데 시내가서 다 동반이 셔와 아니 람지네가서 담에도 왜 셔럽치 아니 데위네가 지나서 람지네가서 이시지 초사고라 초닝난 이시지 초들데네 데우 가다서는 아니 이시지 주구스네 산제 이시 주구 꾸디 어두스 통고야다
And if we look once again to that threefold division of basis, path, and result, the basis there is emptiness, or ultimate truth, and then the path is that collection of wisdom, isn't it? It is like the collection of, or the wisdom consciousness realizing emptiness. And then the result is the Yeshichuku, or the Dharmakaya mind of a Buddha.
세상다 탑신이 신임세도 발진되고 신세어데 찍스토래 탑신이가 니 찍스토 그봐
Yeah.
한다 니 덴바니데 타녀 덴바 타즈도 한다대로 군조드니 쇼연가고 제주지 낭배 겨워드니 겨왕왕보 있습니다 군조 덴바단데 난데바드니 자기 쇼바 나시 탑나 셔런 니디네 자비 잘라 쇼바니요 나시리스 자비 쇼바니요나 난가를 프리제 자주 퍼도 도로 와 스테나시 안에 탑나 셔런인가 야마데요 거네 네 냠슬람 발데네 산예지 고마 도레스네 송구도 하라.
Now, what does it mean for these two of method and wisdom to be in union or conjoined? It means basically that the method supports the wisdom and the wisdom supports the method in terms of the two truths, relative truth and ultimate truth, as it is said in the Chandrakirti's entrance to the middle way. The King of Swans with the two wings of relative truth and ultimate truth starts to head the flock, to lead the flock to the far shore or across the ocean of cyclic existence to nirvana. So it is that, the point being made is that you need the two wings of relative truth and ultimate truth in union, supporting each other, not separate from each other.
답에는 먼저 디 탑시 겨와지 이 시마신사 베나 탑데 답에는 닝제 첨보라 탑디 진시지 야송으로
Yeah.
닝제 첨보당 담에도 왜 셔럼니디 신제 직도 직스토다로 봐다고 직도 직스토다 아니 직셰위나 디 아니 고대면 배진 레알 펜도 그래서
Now, how could we give an example of whether one is held or not by either? So, for example, if you're focusing on great compassion, it can be supported by wisdom consciousness realizing emptiness. In that sense, both of them are mutually supporting each other.
베나 단다지다 심베 트렌드 가래라비나로 탑신이 심베 트렌드 가서나 신제인가 유 직도 직스토어들이다. 탑단 셔럼인가 유 간산디 줄러와 간산디 줄러 닝지 전보다 돈이도 왜 셔럼인가 유 아니 직도 직스토어스 닝지 고면디 셔럽디 공부에도 셔럽디 고면디 닝지 공부에도 도와드려다 직도 직스토어스.
So what does it mean for them to be mutually supporting each other in union in the continuum of one person, or that the two are held by the person? It means that when such a person is meditating on great compassion, that acts as a support to increase the wisdom. And latterly, when they're focusing on the lack of view of intrinsic nature of phenomena, that acts to support their great compassion. So that's how they work together in union to support each other's growth.
답변은 저 닝지 고면디 봐. 닝지 고면디 아니 심진신 동해라 삼단제 동해 텐도기 자와 삼당으로 봐.
Yeah.
아 동해 텐도 잠마서 동해기 유단 태워라. 동해기 오단 태워. 동해기 되거든. 다 동해기 동해단 태워. 두수 삼마 삼당으로다. 동해 닝지세야디 동해다 텐도기 자와질라 닝지라고 열어라.
Yeah. So, for example, when we're meditating on great compassion, we're focused on all sentient beings suffering, and with great affection, we're looking at, okay, so what are the causes of those beings suffering? What is the entity of it? And how does one remove it in terms of the great compassion, isn't it?
다 닝지디 만조문에다 매제나라 공부해야 되다 냠네 치고해야 되다 계속 뭐 쉬어지 먼저 이 낭바이나래 낭바메나래 추켈리니나래 추케말리니나래 정말 닝지세야 돼 초고도로 디인데 좀 된데게 닝지디 계속 뭐 쉬어지 손도 도나래야 아니 겔론다스라 겔론다 아니 겔론다 저 망보달라 라와 미샤위 찔라와 차워서 찌칸시나 닝제오 송도 좀 된데 저는 게 전전부터서 저는 망보를 쉬어질라 치고 말해서 찔랍 찌 가려서나 닝질랍 송도 세상 티케 전부다 좀 된데 랍자데 다 랍자 전사라 당 안저 학과데 안저 기도 진단이 망보 년년서 닝제 배 닝제 돌라 데서 검잡투는 야고 여러 하체 망보 년제 나제 전부차 아니 미 닝제 면조로 미 양상도 탭도로 차야 년가도로 망보 처냐 나데다 하고요 나데다 하고 되게 신경서 나제 제제로 닝지유나 나제 춘이 제가 말봐 나제 맞에는 콘도 연구면도 봐 아니 차도 연구면도 봐 제가 닝제 데스 곰냠네 티돌 삼로 데스 단도위나 정말 연구를 해서
In the context of this life, the practice of great compassion is so important for us, indispensable, whether one is Buddhist or not, whether one is spiritual or not. That should be our main focus, great compassion. Buddha stressed this importance in Sutra, where he addressed the Gelongs, the bhikshus, and said, "O bhikshus, there's not a lot to say. The one thing that you should follow is, if you're going to be a follower of me, if you're going to follow my teaching, the one thing is great compassion." This was the essential piece of advice given. And I think this is very important for us who come to class and do a lot of study. We might think we've studied a lot, know a lot. But somehow if we give way to pride and we get haughty and we think we know something, then there's a danger tripped or that we'll become like a bit rough, thinking kind of like, oh, I know it, like I know a lot. And then the danger with that kind of pride is then jealousy comes and anger comes. And we want to avoid that. So in that light, then, in the context of this life, compassion important.
답변은 닝제 상로 다연데 샘제신이 동해라 텐을 저 동해다 태와 다가 책이 상다연데 아니 동해 용야 그 규들 상다연데 동해 명야 정말 미시 몽배용 거 연구도 알아
야
동해 상로야고 다는 알아서 정말로 몽배 연구하다 몽벌 아래 저 동해 야야야야야 상로단 로에나 아니 저 아니 몽벌 되네 미시벌 되네 동해 총어다 세워 쇼지래와
Now, if we recognize, we look on others with a compassionate attitude, we see that they are suffering, then the thought comes, I myself will remove the suffering that they're going through. But we have to then think, what is the cause of their suffering? And then we come to see that the cause of other beings' suffering is ignorance, or we would say unawareness, unknowing.
제가 니 현대 독선단으로 랑기 동해를 삼단으로 마랑기 동해의 간에 정도 삼단인데 수수 동해의 만자 차단 몽바라 되네 총어래 차도다 차단 몽바 진심 저절로 되네 총어래 다 대야 대르도 자와디 딘질라 되네 아 세딩 만진 숙적 nga sedia nga zin tela dine nga nge sed dine ngoro nge sed nge ji cheshi andi atu ndu nga se nga zi dile chedan de nga de mu din zi tela dine yonde gdo chedan di ndu azi da ni semjen do shin su su dungye gi zawa de teresha ning ji ge wala nge ba de dong ni do gu do sro nge dong ni nge ba de do gu do samje 닝지 고비언지 장가라 동니 고미야게 로당 동니라 녜바지야 두서 아니 동에도 저야 찍래 찍대네 중된 교제를 미시지 먼저 상다야 간다 되메 이랑은 춥된 교 동이 삼당 여러 어디 민도로 먼저 매버지라 요진데도 스타 록시로 먼저 뒤주 동에 지금 미지기 써서 아 동에 소녀들이 미 지금 인선을 된대로 상마다나 이제 스스로 그 로게 네 랑원의 투와 템버 투와 나나와 나시지 딘지디 왕 총 딘지 왕 총샤 데 동닝에 마 또고도 당고 동니 마도니 지기 잘 차셔는 닝지 삼노단도디 동니 또고 벌 녜버 차야 숙철도야 토치도고도 탑람라야 토치도고도 Ningwes yonada ina yin, nishi get together, Chazanga, Ninja Gombe Dogi, don't you do a share of Nishi Tanto, Nishi Shukcher, the Esra, Ninja passing down the Esra.
So if, once again, coming back to this unawareness or unknowing, even just reflecting on your own suffering, where did it come from? Chadangilo. It is desirous attachment and aversion, and underlying that mongba is this confusion, this unawareness. So now this ego clinging, or this clinging to I. So this mistaken clinging to I, from that comes clinging at mine. You know, I and mine. So first comes clinging to I, and then comes clinging to mine. So this is really a type of ignorance that's grasping at the self in an incorrect way. This is the ignorance of grasping at true existence. And when you come to see that other sentient beings are grasping at I and mine, you come to think, oh, they're going through all of that. They're experiencing all of that. And as a result of that, they suffer. So therefore, with that compassionate view of what they're going through, then you are inspired to realize the opposite of that unawareness, clinging to self, which is wisdom consciousness, realizing emptiness. So let's give an example of it. Even when we suffer, we think somehow our suffering is autonomous, right? That the suffering we're going through is not an other-dependent phenomena. And we're mistaken in that regard. What we're doing is taking something that is a non-existent to be an existent. This is a complete perverse way of perceiving an object. It is an erroneous consciousness, a mistaken consciousness. And when you come to see that sentient beings are perceiving things with this mistaken consciousness, your compassion for other beings is supported by that understanding, by that wisdom understanding. And that's the method to increase the compassion as well.
Chazanda, Tony Gomundi, Nia, Ninja Shukcher, right? Pena Ninja, Tony Gomundi Zangalata, when they look some time or
okay, no, we'll
in the Chodamje, Chicken, Chore, Masia de, Tembamatore, some time. This year in the Zangala, Suzuki, Dungi Rimang, which you Ranshuk never chat with it. Susu Comin Benner, Susu Doni Combayina, Cindy, that Dio Mare, sometime do any. Tuyungi, Susu Simnalayaji, Takurawaji down. And she was in your tongue of her shigro. This you do. Let the Duny the coach house and Susu Simlaya, Dewadan, Dungi you do with the Azida. Simjamang worship. 동문이 남샤미 시베 온게 동해 용대 그도 와서 아직 상네 동이디 공배도지 양자 닝지 숙처를 줘야 된대 어두시는 용거로다.
So meditating on emptiness, one is meditating on, and how does that increase one's great compassion? When you meditate on emptiness, you're going for the final mode of abidance of the object, that in fact the object is a dependent arising. Okay, illustrating that yourself or the I, isn't truly existent and is in fact lacking true existence. Coming to see that, you see how sentient beings perceive the opposite and suffer. So sentient beings would perceive that I as not being dependent on causes and conditions or aggregates, and they cling to that appearance. But when you come to see the opposite, when you come to see that the I or self is a dependent arising, depends on the five aggregates, and is not autonomous, then that kind of solidity of clinging really softens. And with that softening of solidity, it increases the compassion for others, because you see that they are perceiving objects in an erroneous way. Before it was mentioned that even to study and get an idea of that is great, let alone how powerful the support for compassion would be if you realize emptiness directly, Ravagisla, yeah.
아니 난다디 닝지라 미미르미 닝지 사야지 돈이 또 너무 쉬운 거 말아봐. 닝지 숨이 봐. 지나 미미르미 닝지 사야지 돈이 또 차네. 네 때문에 겨워 심지를 민내디 동에 전적에 자와사야지. 돈이도 왜 셔럽지 장배 떡기 네 닝지 전부 샤고로. 지나 어디 닝지 돈이 마도는 닝지 전부 미미르미 닝지도 깨요 말다.
Not only that, but the third type of compassion, which is a type of compassion that is non-objectifying, you won't even realize that third type of compassion without the support of wisdom consciousness realizing emptiness. Not possible.
다 심바당 다디지 컨소디스틱싱 디세우 차마다 뭐 심바 심바당 뭐 심바를 데스 켜와요.
Right, so now we have to understand then there's a difference between directly holding and just holding generally in terms of these wisdom consciousnesses.
당고스시는 간산디 줄래야 닝지 전부다 돈유도에 셔런인가 원주도 요거다. 다들 제도로면 쉬어요 말은 제도로는 뭐 심바데.
Okay, so direct holding means that the person must have already manifested or realized great compassion and emptiness in their continuum, and they will hold them in post-meditative equipoise, right?
무엇 요었던 맛에 냠내 채운디 찌야 냠내야 공배도 네 직슈대야 공배도 되지 나 아니 땅에 쓰는 거라.
Yeah. So not only is he or she directly holding these two, having realized them, but in that post-meditative equipoise, as one practices one, the other increases, and so forth.
답변은 단다 냠샤도 줄라 탑시 이 영어에서 심바디요 말에 심바디요래 뭐 심바디요 말에 가르서나 디줄로 군조 남제로 된 주 두고요 말아 베나 티전 돌람 바제멜란라고 차샤 당연히로 베나 티전 돌람 바제멜란 디줄라 아니 탑시니 심바디요래 뭐 심바디요 말에 로 디줄로 군조 심지 탑디 뭐스 요 말다 원주도 요 말다 돈이도 별로면시.
Okay, now let's give an example of held but not directly held. And this would be in the case of the Arya and meditative equipoise on emptiness for a great vehicle practitioner on the path of seeing, on the uninterrupted path of seeing. Here it is held but not directly held because there is no appearance whatever of any relative truth in his or her continuum. So you have the notion of being held, but not directly. Right, so what they have in their mind is great compassion and bodhicitta as a relative truth, but at the time of meditative equipoise, these are not manifest, right, because they're relative truths. Yeah. So that in that case, when we talk about held but not directly held, then that's only talking about a type of meditative equipoise and emptiness alone. There's a vacuity.
다디 파진테베게 탑시니 신지 파진테벨로라 탑시니 병오 타데르가.
All right. So here we're talking from the perspective of the perfection vehicle, where the method and wisdom are different entities.
신다 주어 신다 다 말하네. 다. 저도 저 군이 되어야
Do you two have any questions?
그 되어야지다.
I'll at the back. The Sabati. Do you guys have any questions?
Do you have a question? You're tired? Working hard? Question gone? Okay, 말해. 이제 아니 다 대샤샤나 말아 다 타고도 이제 결혼도 되게 다리 눈다 되나라 도리 숨다 탑신이 되는 게 말아 벼되게 양자 졸링체 장 디체 디게다 니와도 신고야 지 그래 당도 망부 돈이 겨와 그래 말 간장바디 시나야고 여러 삼노 망고다.
So now probably that's been through quite a bit. We might stop today. But what I would encourage in the discussion is to go over these points again, because it's very good to have a firm footing in the material we've already covered, even though it seems like you're repeating it. So these ones of abiding in the class of realizations, the question 4, which was to do with focal object, abandonment and result, go over that again, and what we've just been through, method and wisdom, with regard to the perfection vehicle. You can discuss.
다 뒤에서 냠내 알아서 상물로 냠내 치고라 다 냠내 치두장가라 아니 지 가시 잔죽심 고문데도 동이 제로다 동이 고문데도 잔죽심 제로다 아니 안도 미다버 고문데도야 잔죽심 고미야 제로다 닝지 고미야 제로다 제가 미다버 고문인데 아직다 심제 신다도 미다버 남샤마시 단지지 온게 아니 동에 다가라서 와카시다 단지 온게 주사야다 뭐고 저 배전체 아니 시도도니 샤제 미신다 비지 제로더로 안도서 닝지 아직 닝지 미다바 또기 닝지 슈처로야 어두스네 띠띠다 릭바데 가와이는 키초고라
Okay, so inducing for us the following types of reasons would be very good. There's a tendency that if we meditate on emptiness, we might, if we meditate on bodhicitta, we might forget emptiness, or the other way around, we might try and meditate on emptiness, but leave the relative truths of bodhicitta and great compassion behind. Or when we meditate on impermanence, we forget great compassion. But actually, we should induce the following reasons: that it is because of not understanding impermanence and grasping at permanence that beings create karma and suffer. So when we understand that people cling to permanence and they don't realize impermanence, that should increase our great compassion. So this is a way we can meditate, and these things support each other. Yeah, so that means whatever we're doing in daily life, our practice, we take with us in that interdependence.
아니 수수 곰자디 다 칼리도릭 차거도 따로.
And when you meditate, it's good to check. What if you realized what class are you?
상상라 곰지 잡잡잡잡 추즈 배진 투즈기 도르스네요 차이인가 여러분들 아디 조금만 사나는 투즈 실 거고도 투즈 디나라 차고도 스테디 투즈기 도르네요 투즈기 도르스네요 차도지고
There's a danger for us when we meditate that we're abiding in the class of time because we're thinking, oh, this meditation's long, how long is it going to go, I'm hungry.
아니 가시 야 미밀을 다쳐 보세요. 아주 건망 자고 요치되면 컨디션 돼야 지금 주제 도르스네 차로라.
And then there's a danger that we're abiding in the class of the 8 worldly dharmas as we do our sadhanas. We might be thinking, oh, so and so did this and that. So therefore, yeah, so check your mind, where's the class, where's the insight going towards.
얘들 제가 그 단다 씹어서 많이 봐지. 아니 수수 냠네 곰 뒤윤 곰 강자야 돼 씹어치. 다 개지슈디 니 뒤윤 뭐지야 최체디. 인지민지 간된다고 제 배전야 된다게 말아. 다디 중나다 야 보러 봐. 제제님이 마 배자지 제제 발음 제제 연아 콜로로 곰시 야고직 소두고도 와. 약간씩 배디 매매체 수수 삼로스탄 뒤에야 되고요 말아. 하고 찬양 보고요. 삼로 당제. 내 간다. 수수 내 뒤균에라고 왔다. 수수 내가 간지해야 돼. 닝지단 되어요 말아. 닝지단 닝지기 꾸네라네. 근데 내가 지도비나 다 정말로 틱징 추르 도라.
We need to have a balance. It is not enough, of course, firstly, just to know the meaning of something. One's spiritual practice has to go hand in hand with one's experience of it. Conversely, there are people who try and practice anything without knowing sadhana and texts. That would be the other side or extreme or habit. But the point is to ideally to make the two together and equal in that sense. But in short, whatever work we do, we should have a compassionate attitude when we do that work, and then whatever we do becomes the great vehicle or the Buddha Dharma. That's important.
가드위네 수수 란진지 enge 신기유 nga정we nyanya lama devche 와 튠람 밀라 튠람 치고야 돼 닝제유나 튠람 치도 그러와 신배기 닝제 신동에 들들 자와시 대화된되게 참바도서 요나 아 밀라 튠람 데 가드위나 enge 신기유 nga nyanya lab데나 아니 로고메와 데 로고메와 차도 냥가도 와와
The reducing self, cherishing in the light of being in harmony with others is very important in one's daily life. So then having that loving affection in terms of being altruistic instead of having always thinking of self, that's very important.
I remember one time I think my father told one story. I think this is a very nice story. 대보 차 대보로 가래. Henry. 차대
A bird. Hen?
Henry. 잠을 공화단이 잠을.
Chicken.
Rooster.
Rooster maybe.
Rooster.
Rooster, I think.
One rooster.
Like the eggs?
No. Chicken. Rooster.
Oh, rooster.
Yeah, rooster. And he thinking, oh, he's very beautiful, and he's better than other than, and he don't want to connection other people's, other animals. He think he is best. And he forgot everything, and he a little bit pushing down other birds, and he went there, and then he saw a frog.
A crow.
Frog.
A frog.
A frog. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm sunbathing here." And he in the roost said, "Oh, we need competition. I have nice body." And frog says, "Oh no, I want to eat. I want to for my lunch." And the frog jumped. He don't want to spend with him. And then and he went. He saw the cow and he said, "Cow, you're so ugly. We want a competition body." And the cow said, "No. I don't have enough time. I need service for people." And then Rose to go and then see donkey. Donkey have lots of carrier. And he said, "Oh, your body is so ugly. Yours, we want some competition body." And then donkey said, "No. I have look after people. When people fitting me, I not enough time with you." And he's so lonely. And then he saw there one yogi, and he said, "Oh, I'm very hard to find a friend. Nobody spend with me." And then yogi said, "What did you talk?" And I said, "I want a competition with this and have nice body." And he said, "Well, I think you're so too much subjecting. You need, if you want some more friend, and you can some benefit other people or animal." And then he said, "What I can do?" And the yogi said, "Oh, those people very late sleep, then they're not in a breakfast. So your morning maybe 6 o'clock you can do some alarm, and then people benefit. Then they become you. Then everyone become your friend." And next morning, then he talk, and 1 month later, and everyone, people feed him, and cows coming with him, frog coming, and donkey come with him, and then he has lost friend, Do you understand what my story?
Yes.
Well, that's good. That's nice story.
Beautiful, huh?
Okay, now is here.
Page 31 for the short mandala.
Sanje Shindi Midi Ewayi Nanda Shinla Je Barajo Kudera Denshin Nanga